Burkina Faso exposes Western troops for natural resources exploitation, not peace mission. It was at the 78th session of the United Nations (UN) Assembly that the Minister of State Affairs to Burkina Faso, on behalf of the President Ibrahim Traoré, spoke bitter truths to the whole assembly regarding Western troops in Africa. In a speech written by President Ibrahim Traoré himself, he began by paying homage to all those leaders who lost their lives trying to make a just and equitable world. He went ahead to mention leaders like Fidel Castro of Cuba, Patrice Lumumba of Congo, Maury Bucke of Mali, Ruben Nyobe, and Felix Moumie of Cameroon, Sylvanus Olympio of Togo, Nyobe of Argentina, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X of USA, Nelson Mandela of South Africa, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, and a lot more. These leaders who were assassinated either by poisoning or imprisonment. Their only crime was embodying the dreams and hopes of people that had been killed, raped, and trampled by the Western world. He went ahead to tell the UN Assembly that he was not there to mourn those people, but to talk about the diplomatic democracy, the thirst for power, lies of state, fanatic thirst for profit, and diabolical spirit of domination and exploitation of man by man, which are the true wounds that poison coexistence. The minister went ahead to say that its obvious inequality is intentional. If not, they would have done everything possible to take out inequality. He gave an example of Libya, where thousands of people lost their lives in a flood. A man-made disaster that wouldn't have happened if the Western world did not kill the Libyan guide, Muammar Gaddafi, on October 2011. In the speech, President Traoré implored on Senegal, Benin, Niger, Ghana, Chad, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, and all the people of Africa to stand up in fraternity in Africa, in order to stop the imperialists from setting fire in Niger as they did in Libya. He insisted that ECOWAS, the African Union, and UN must become true organizations of the people rather than being structures used in the maneuvering of heads of states to destabilize other countries by killing their leaders. This is the only way the UN Charter international law would make any sense. Again, speaking about the UN Charter law, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is unending and even desired by certain powers. Several Western countries, especially the US and European Union, have provided all forms of military support to the conflict. The Ukrainian population are used as volunteers and recruited as patriots in the war. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are dealing with a war that was imposed on them by imperialism under pretext of terrorism. Yet the UN Charter law does nothing about it with principles of equality, justice on one hand, and on the other hand, international law. With all the insecurity, over 58,000 patriotic volunteers in Burkina Faso have been trained and mobilized to fight alongside the Defensive Security Forces, FDS, to protect lives and property. These are the patriots that certain heads of states of ECOWAS and African Union are trying to describe to international community as malicious, and that's a very shameless state-sponsored lies. If the international community were honest in its commitment to fight terrorism, it would have no problem with civilian populations training themselves to protect themselves. Since they want the African nations to always count on them for support, thereby allowing their troops fight unending wars. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other countries organized along their common borders by pulling their forces together to combat terrorism. France came out of nowhere to impose its instrument, the G5 Sahel. This shows a clear lack of honesty in the international community. After Burkina Faso's coup d'état September 2022, they faced cynical sanctions. The so-called international community, led by France, tried to nominate a prime minister in Burkina Faso they could control in vain. They went ahead to trying to impose various ministers at strategic positions, all in vain. All these steps where, in order to have puppet leaders in strategic positions, they could easily control and cause chaos. They also went again to negotiate a continuing relation so that Ibrahim Traoré will implement their will, but he refused in the name of the high interest of his people. With response to this denial, coup d'états were unleashed upon him, and unfortunately all these macabre maneuvers were led by puppet leaders of Africa. In addition to cutting off aids, France have blocked their material equipment. An example is the air defense equipment needed to defend their country. Burkina Faso had a contract with Brazil. Other weapons were supposed to come from Belgium, and navigation and firing systems were to come from the US and engines from Canada. All these weapons were cynically blocked by France. Yet they talked about defending human rights at the UN. If they were honest, then Burkina Faso demands their weapons they need to protect and defend their people to be delivered to them. He went ahead to say that if nothing was done to fix the situation, history will hold them responsible for failing to assist people in danger. The Western world does not want Burkina Faso to trade or partner with any other nation of their choice, thing which the Ibrahim Traoré vehemently opposed and told them they will partner and trade with whoever they want to. In the speech read by Minister of State Affairs, President Traoré went ahead to remind President Emmanuel Macron that on 14th of June 1940 through the BBC in England, an appeal was launched by his grandfather, General Charles de Gaulle, to Africa to come and save France from the grip of the narcissist, where 17,000 Malians died, a blood debt that France has hidden. Despite all the looting of both humans and resources back in the days, Africa still has a great deal of mineral resources. There are 30% of worldwide mineral reserves, 40% of gold reserves, 33% of diamond reserves, 83% of coltan reserves used for telephone, 60% of cobalt reserves for batteries, 55% of uranium reserves. These are minerals the Western world can't seem to get their eyes off and keep making excuses to stay in Africa, in the name of helping African nations fight terrorism. Mali's Assimi Goïta, who seized the reins of his country in a military coup in 2020, explained that the Lit-Tuko-Goma Charter is the building block for an alliance of Sahel states to establish a collective defense and mutual assistance framework for their populations. The new body carved out of West Africa by Niger and 2 other countries that rallied around it in the face of ECOWAS's controversial response now looks set to redefine the power equation so that the repercussions could be felt beyond the sub-region. Some analysts see the birth of the Alliance of Sahel States as a sign of the continued erosion of French influence in West Africa. Reason why Burkina Faso's Minister of State boldly asserted a thought-provoking perspective on the presence of Western troops in Africa and called a spade, saying, "Western troops are in Africa for natural resources and not for peace mission." Military interventions under the United Nations banner are deployed to deal with armed conflicts on the continent. However, despite having superior weapons compared to armed groups scattered across Africa, these UN missions have failed and continue to fail dismally on their mandates. We could ask the question, why do they keep failing when they have all what it takes to stop all terrorism in African nations? In countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, South Sudan, Mali, and the Central African Republic, peacekeepers find themselves having to deal with different political and cultural situations they often don't understand. In April, hundreds of young people, for several days, protested in the towns of Beni and Goma, demanding the departure of MONUSCO, the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for its failure to stop the bloodshed in the region. The people seem to be fed up with the existence of troops in their country that seem to do nothing to stop all the bloodshed. Despite the presence of foreign troops on the ground, the political situation in northern Mali, where Islamist groups are active, remains dire. France has some 5,000 troops deployed across Africa's arid Sahel region as part of its anti-jihadist force Operation Barkhane, while smaller German contingents participate in the UN MINUSMA peacekeeping mission and a European Union mission to train Malian soldiers. Paris first intervened in Mali in 2013 at the request of the government to help quell a jihadist rebellion that broke out the previous year. However, the brutal insurgency is still raging in the vast nation of 19 million people and has spread to neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. In an interview with the journal Du Dimanche newspaper, Macron said that Paris could not stay by the side of a country where there is no longer democratic legitimacy or a transition. Mali coup leader Assimi Goïta had fired the president and prime minister of a transitional regime in late May. Macron also warned that France would withdraw its troops from Mali should the country lurch towards radical Islamism under Goïta's leadership. A threat that does not bother the leader of Mali, as they are doing everything possible to protect themselves by themselves. Choguel Maïga, an opposition leader who is tipped to become the new prime minister, has close ties with the influential Imam Maury Bucke. Both men and most of Mali's political elite favor dialogue with Mali's jihadists to stem the bloodshed in the country, a policy long opposed by Paris. Ultimately, the goal of France, Germany, and the UK deploying troops in the Sahel region is to prevent Islamists from crossing over to Europe. The biggest concern about peacekeeping in Africa is that it hasn't improved in the past 25 years, for a reason best known by the Western world. The missions seem to be wrapped up in economic interests rather than protecting local populations. If their mission was truly keeping African nations safe from all terrorist attacks, then there should be no way all the armed groups in respective nations still exist till date. Burkina Faso's president keeps insisting with gathered analysis that the Western troops are not here to protect African nations, but they are here to exploit Africa's mineral resources. Being in Africa in the name of peacekeeping is the only way they can confidently stay in African soil. Until the whole peacekeeping system is overhauled to serve the people's interests and operate strictly under the terms of their mandates, local populations in Africa's hotspots will remain at the mercy of militia groups and other warring factions. Will the Western world ever leave the African soil? For how long will they keep pretending? Leave a comment on what you think, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe.